Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Bible in the Backyard. I'm Haley, and this is my backyard. It's fall here, and the colors are just amazing right now. However, we're not talking about fall. We are talking about Gideon still. Gideon and Ephraim. Actually, last time we talked about Gideon and how he went from 32,000 troops to 300, and God's hand was in the battle. And how the people scattered because they were afraid of the sounds in the middle of the night and everything. So we just finished up, and the battle is still going. So how that is these people were fleeing, these kings and armies were fleeing where they were at. And so when they fled, the 300 in Gideon, they followed after them. So once they realized that, hey, they're fleeing, they're running away, let's go follow after them. So this is what happens in Judges chapter 8. So let's read it. And the men of Ephraim said unto him, Gideon has made it to Ephraim, Why hast thou not served us, that thou callest not when thou wentest to fight the Midianites? And they did chide with him sharply. And he said unto them, What have I done now in comparison to you? Is not the gleaning of the grapes of Ephraim better than the vintage of Abiezer? And God had delivered into your hands the princes of the Midian, Oreb and Zeb, and what I was able to do in comparison of you. Then their anger was abated towards him, and when he had said that. And Gideon came to Jordan and passed over, and he and 300 men that were with him faint, yet pursuing them. So they hadn't had anything to eat. They were tired. They were exhausted. And he said unto the men of Succoth, Give, I pray you, loaves of bread unto the people that follow me, for they be faint, and I am pursuing after Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian. And the princes of Succoth said, Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna now in thine hand, that we should give you bread unto thine army? And Gideon said, Therefore, when the Lord has delivered Zebah and Zalmunna into mine hand, I will tear your flesh with the thorns of the wilderness and with briars. Then he went up thence into Peniel, and spake unto them likewise. And the men of Peniel answered him as the same men of Succoth had answered him. And he spake also unto the men of Peniel, saying, When I come again in peace, I will break down this tower. So what this is these men were doubtful. These men were doubtful. These cities were doubtful. The men of Succoth and the men of Peniel were doubtful that Gideon actually could withstand it. They saw the size of their army, and they also saw what these princes had and in the hands and these leaders of Midian, and they're like, Can you really do that? And also alongside of that, Gideon wasn't asking them to come and fight. He was asking them to give food, to give water. Gideon wasn't asking help on the front lines. He just wanted the support. He just wanted some bread for his men and his army. And they said no. So what did he do? He said, This is what's going to happen. This is it. And this is interesting because it's like, you're not going to help us fight these kings. I'm going to come back, I'm going to tear your tower down, and I'm going to hurt your men too. So let's continue. Now Zebah and Zalmunna were in Karkor, and their host with them, about 15,000 men, all that were left of all the host of the children of the east. For there fell 120,000 men that drew a sword. So at the original site, 120,000 men died. At the original site of where Gideon and them broke the pitchers, yelled, blew the trumpets, whatnot. So about 15,000 men were left. And Gideon went up by the way of them and dwelt in the tents of Nobah and Jogbehah, and smote the host, for the host was secure. And when Zebah and Zalmunna fled, he pursued after them, and took 2 kings of Midian, Zebah and Zalmunna, and discomfited all the host. And Gideon the son of Joash returned from battle before the sun was up, and caught a young man of men in Succoth, and required of him, and he had described unto them the princes of Succoth and the elders thereof, even 70 men. 70 men. 77. Because 70, each score is 20. I think. Each score is 20 and then plus 17, so that's 77. And he came to the men of Succoth and said, Behold, Zebah and Zalmunna, with whom ye did upbraid me, saying, Are ye the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna now in thine hand, that we should give bread unto the men that are weary? And he took to the elders of the city, and thorns of the wilderness, and briars, and with them he taught the men of Succoth. And he beat down the tower of Peniel, and slew the men of the city. So he captures the Midianites, the 2 leaders of the Midianites, and then he goes back. It's not funny, but he goes back, and he goes back with these 2 leaders to Succoth and to Peniel, and he's like, look at what I did without your help. Okay, here we go. So basically, he made good on his promise. He said, back verses 4 through 8 or 4 through 9, he says, this is what I'm going to do whenever I capture this man, or these men. So I'm going to come back, and since you didn't help me defeat this, and there's no doubt that God's hand is in this, because there were still 15,000 men left. There were still that many people left. But however, in verse 18, things get personal. Things get personal for Gideon, and that is why really Zebah and Zalmunna, you'll see the underscore of why he went after these 2 people. Verse 18, it says, And then he said unto Zebah and Zalmunna, What manner of men were they whom slew at Tabor? And they answered, As thou art, so were they. Each one resembled a children of a king. And he said, and Gideon said, They were my brethren, even the sons of my mother, as the Lord liveth, if ye had saved them alive, I would not slay you. So what happened at Tabor? Gideon's brothers got killed by these men right here. And he's like, I wouldn't have a reason to kill you if you just left them alone and you just let them live. I wouldn't have this vendetta against you. In verse 20, he says, And he said unto Jether, his firstborn. So basically, Gideon says to his son, Up and slay them. But the youth drew not his sword, for he feared, because he was yet a youth. And Zebah and Zalmunna said, Rise thou and fall upon us, as the man is, so is his strength. And Gideon arose and slew Zebah and Zalmunna, and took away the ornaments that were on the camels' necks. Verse 20, I kind of want to go back to that. I want to go back, and it says, But the youth drew not his sword, for he feared, because he was yet a youth. He was a boy and he was afraid. And I kind of looked at it this way. When we are young in our faith and we're asked to stand up and we're asked to hold a line and we're asked to do this and we're asked to do that, we probably are going to falter because we don't know how to yet. We've watched and we've listened and we've learned by watching our parents, watching the pastor, watching the people of the church come together and our people in our community come together. But we haven't been asked to stand ourselves, and what do we actually truly believe in? So when we're young in our faith, when we first become Christians and we do this, that, and the other, yes, we're on fire for the Lord, but we also may not always know where we stand with things. And so we may falter, and we may be asked to say something or do something that we're terrified to do because we don't know how to do it. Or maybe it may not be, maybe not when we're young in our faith, but when we've lived a little bit and we've let the world come back in on us. But however, Gideon takes up the sword because he is stronger. He's seen this. He's been promised by God. He knows how to trust in it. And he's in a position of leadership. So what Gideon does is he defeats the Midianites. However, it doesn't always end that way. Gideon slew the Midianites, so he was a judge of Israel, so he saved the people of Israel. In verse 22 it says, "And the men of Israel said unto Gideon, Rule thou over us, both thou and thy sons also, for thou hast delivered us from the hand of Midian. And Gideon said unto them, I will not rule over you, neither shall my son rule over you. The Lord shall rule over you." This is important because the children of Israel were supposed to be and are set apart. They're supposed to be a peculiar people. They're supposed to be different. They're not supposed to have this king and a ruler. The Lord is supposed to be leading them. And Gideon knows this. Gideon knows that he's like, I'm not supposed to be in charge. The Lord is supposed to be in charge. And so when he says, the Lord shall rule over you, the people wanted someone that they could see to worship and to lead. They didn't want this overarching theme of, oh, okay, God, you're this figure of my imagination, when it's really not a figure of your imagination at all. He is very real. He works details in our lives that we don't even, if we ask for, if we're really detailed about it, it'll show. However, what Gideon does next in the chapter is dangerous. It's very dangerous. It makes idolatry a thing in the way of the Israelites, and since they were already they've gone this way in the past, and now they're going to come back to it. In verse 24 it says, "And Gideon said unto them, I would desire a request of you, that ye would give every man the earring of his prey. For they had golden earrings, because they were Ishmaelites. And they answered and says, We will willingly give them. And they spared a garment, and did cast therein every man an earring of his prey." And the weight of the golden earrings that he requested was 1,700 shekels of gold. Besides ornaments and collars, the purple raiment that was on the kings of Midian, and besides the chains that were on about the camels' necks. Just the shekels of gold that were from the earrings. And then he takes off the gold from the camels, golds from the kings, whatnot. And Gideon made an ephod thereof, and put it in his city, even in Orpha. All of Israel went thither a whoring after it, which this thing became a snare unto Gideon and to his house. What an ephod is, I actually had to look it up. I had to Dr. Google it, and I'm like, what is this? And I was like, is it a staff? Is it a this? No, it's a piece of clothing that the priest wear. So it's a piece of clothing that goes on the torso and around, so it covers your front and it covers your back. And he made this ephod and put it in his hometown of Orpha. And the thing is that it says in verse 27, Israel went thither a whoring after it. The thing became a snare unto Gideon and to his house. They wanted to worship something so tangible, something that they could touch and they could see and they could feel. Got my coffee. I can feel this, definitely, very, 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 very much so. And they could be like, oh, that's what saved us. Israel, they missed the whole point. Israel missed the entire point of Gideon defeating this army with 300 men that had 100,000 men and more. Israel missed the mark, and I think maybe Gideon missed the mark. I think what he was trying to do was good. His intent was good. The result of that was not good. Because the Israelites didn't end up necessarily worshiping God. I think they did for a while. But I think they worshiped the ephod even more. And that's what made the idolatry happen. So in verse 28, I'm just going to continue. It says, thus was Midian subdued before the children of Israel, so that they lifted up their heads no more. So Midian was no longer a threat. And the country was in the quietness 40 years in the days of Gideon. And Jerubbaal, the son of Joash, went and dwelt in his own house. So he just went back home. And Gideon had 70 sons of his body begotten, for he had many wives. So y'all can do the math. I'm not going to do the math. And his concubine that was in Shechem, she also bare him a son, whose name he called Amalek. And Gideon the son of Joash died the good old age, and was buried in the sepulchre of Joash his father in Orpha of the Abizarites. And it came to pass in verse 33, as soon as Gideon was dead, that the children of Israel turned again and went a whoring after Balaam, and made Baal-berith their god. And the children of Israel remembered not the Lord their God, who had delivered them out of the hands of all their enemies on every side. Neither showed they kindness to the house of Jerubbaal, namely Gideon, according to all the goodness which he had showed unto Israel. They just escaped. Let me go back for a second. They just escaped 7 years of oppression, and then they had a generation of basically freedom under Gideon. After Gideon and the Lord and Gideon frees them. They forget about that as soon as possible. Once Gideon dies, they're like, oh, okay, Gideon's dead. What am I going to look at now? Who am I going to worship now? And they go and they turn to something else and to someone else, because they don't know who to turn to, because they can't see anything. I think that's the thing with Israel, and that's the thing during Judges, and that's the thing in our lives too, is that we want something tangible to hold on to so badly. When it comes to believing something, when it comes to worshiping, when it comes to this and comes to that it's like, what's going to make us feel better? What's going to make us feel better with this? And what was that? What can I physically hold on to? This is what you can physically hold on to. Not an idol, not a this. This isn't an idol. This is God's love letter to us. This is failures upon failures upon failures of people knowing and learning that they need God. And I think that this is important for us to learn. And I think that even in my own life, I have things that I'm like, oh, I need to go do this. but I don't ever really make time for this, and I need to change that. I do. But y'all have a good week. Y'all have a blessed week. That's the story of Gideon. Next week we're going to go into another story in Judges. So, see you later.